Hi, everyone. I'm Doug, or Doug Reichen. I'm a member of AFOSR, the Air Force Office of Scientific Research, and welcome to our continued series of events about the science of the future and as it relates to AI and mathematics, machine learning, and things of this ilk. Want to share with you what I think will be a really fine time with several key people I've known forever. They are wonderful thinkers. And I tend to think of everybody today as a thinker, not a panelist, not a speaker, because I'm trying to capture the spirit of a dear friend of mine, Marvin Minsky. And he and I spent many decades always in his kitchen trying to find a good question. So my colleagues back in October, today, in the future, are challenged with, let's find the right questions that'll get us to the year 2040. Well, to get to 2040, we probably have to go through some great questions in the year 2025 or in the year 2030. So that's what we're going to do. We're just going to think. Each thinker will think for a period of about 8 minutes, and then the other thinkers will join in and raise interesting questions to the key questions of a given thinker, which will be about 15 minutes. And then we'll move through the group of thinkers on these thought experiments that they have for us today. I also want to share just one more thought. I did not want to be the host every time we hold an event, because you already heard from me in October. There are some amazing people who I want to host this event every time we hold it. And I also have a selfish goal, and that is I want to build some really good bridges around AFRL. So you don't need to hear from me anymore. Thank God. I turned to one of my very dear friends here in the Air Force, that's Benji, and asked him, would you host the event? He is an AFRL fellow. He's done some unbelievable science and material science, and he wants to raise a question or two of how we get out there. I mean, way out there, you know. So as they would say in Star Trek, that's for our director, make it so, Benji.
Great, thanks, Doug. Really appreciate the intro, and also really for the opportunity to host the second in the series that Doug has put together, as only Doug could do with the thinkers. And I do absolutely enjoy the format of, rather than being sort of a download of information, that it be a give and take. First amongst this highest level of researchers in AI and machine learning, and also then eventually for the audience. And I'm already super excited that we have 1,000 people registered and over 300 people online. I also wanted to thank Doug for letting me into his group of wonderful thinkers and specialists, and also that he's now willing he's now part of our group of people trying to change how we do research, which is what I'll talk about in a sec here. But before I did that, I just wanted to do a quick around the room, so to speak, for each of our thinkers to say hello. And so we'll go in order of the presentations. And before that, I will just kind of caveat in saying that because we want to pack so much in to such a short amount of time, we won't go through everyone's tremendous accomplishments, but they are online. Absolutely, please go and read them and go to their homepages and find out more about them, because it's such an impressive group. But otherwise, I'll just go around the room so people can say hi. So Rolf, if we could start with you, please.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Because I think image is like frozen. I wasn't sure. I'm Ralph Izmailov. I'm a chief scientist in Teraton Labs.
Wait, time out. Can we make the images come up right now over the screen so you can really see Ralph and everybody?
I'm gonna try.
Then you has to maybe close your sharing.
Oh, is that what it is? Okay, let me stop that. Okay, let's see. Ralph, yeah, I see a black screen for you.
Your camera is not on.
Yeah, or it
Strange.
might
Okay, hold on.
need to reload if that doesn't work. Well, while Ralph is doing that, Vlad, can you say hi, please? This is so Vladimir Vachnik.
Yeah, hi.
Hi, Vlad. How are you doing?
I'm okay. Thank you.
Awesome. Next is Professor Katerina Fratkiadaki.
Yes, hi everyone. I'm very happy to be here.
Well, that doesn't look like you.
Thank you.
Like Bart.
Next, Professor Carla Gomez from Cornell. Hi, Carla, you're muted, but.
Hi, I'm Carla Gomes from Cornell University. Great to be here. This is an exciting event.
Thank you. And also from Cornell, Professor Bart Salmon.
Hi, I'm Bart Salmon, also from Cornell. It's fun to be here, and I'm looking forward to the panel.
Wonderful. And Rolf, if you're, how's your visual going?
Well, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah, it's something strange. Maybe I should reboot the Zoom, but you know,
yeah, you have a little bit of time to do that. So yeah, I would go ahead and do that.
Can we also introduce another member of our team? Is Scott Klaus.
Oh yes, thank you.
The most amazing machine learning friend I've had the pleasure to know for 7 years here from Wright-Patterson. He's part of our Acts 3. Well, you introduce him.
Yep, absolutely. Scott Klaus is a Act 3 member. So Act 3 is AFRL's crack team of artificial intelligence and autonomy specialists, of which Scott is one of our premier members. I'm actually also co-located with Act 3. So I have personal experience with how good they are. Scott, do you want to unmute and say hi?
Sure. I'm just glad to be here again today. Glad nobody voted me out after the last after the last gathering. So good to see everybody.
All right. Yeah, voted you off the island, right? That's good. Okay. Well, so with that, I'm going to start and give a little bit of intro, and then we're going to go into our, and we won't have questions after mine, but then we'll go straight to Rolf, and hopefully Rolf is okay by then. So here we go. So what I'm going to do is just kind of like give you a little bit of background on where I'm coming from on this, and which is a very different way from most of the folks, and ask you, I flipped the question a little bit. Instead of the science of the future of science. And so what does that mean? And so there's a great challenge by Professor Hiroaki Kitano, which is the Nobel Turing Challenge. So can an AI scientist, and I'll say combined with human researchers, team together to win a Nobel Prize by the year 2050? So that for me has been incredibly motivating to what I'm about to tell you about. But that is, how can we exploit what actually the folks here are going to talk about over the next couple of hours to really do better at science. And so the way Professor Kitano puts it is, there are two independent axes, autonomy and intelligence, so they're not the same. And so you can have autonomy without intelligence and vice versa. But the other thing that I think is really very important to point out is his sort of take that scientific discovery is at the pre-industrial revolution level. And that is to say that as researchers in labs, when we go into our labs, we would be similar to farmers before there were tractors, right? And so if we were farmers, we would be farming with hand tools and with beasts of burden. And so his thing, and I agree, is that the Nobel Turing Challenge will be won by a combination of intelligence and autonomy. And as we'll find out today, together with the incorporation of human knowledge and understanding. And so for an Air Force perspective and a DoD perspective, former Secretary of Defense Mark Esper really talked about this for automated autonomous chemistry, but it's broadly true for research, is that if we can have robots, autonomous research robots that help us to do our research, this frees up time for our scientists and researchers to focus on next generation innovation rather than countless tests and experiments, right? So what we do is we're wasting a lot of our time manually going around and doing experiments. And so when we think about revolutions, we have the Industrial Revolution, which we all know about, right? Steam engines and internal combustion engines replaced or multiplied human labor, manual labor, by factors of 100 and 1,000. So allowing people to do things that they could never do just based on human strength. The Cognitive Revolution is really about using computers to do cognitive labor, right? And so computers in the 40s, if you use the word computers, you were talking about people, mainly women, who were using adding machines to calculate firing tables. And then we had, you know, the revolution in computing, and now computers to us are transparent, right? We call them cell phones, and they have tremendous power to do things. On the other hand, research is still very much a workflow that Madame Curie, who we see on the left there, would recognize, right? We go into the lab, we have test tubes, we mix samples, we do analyses. Our workflow is not automated or autonomous, except that right now we are starting a research revolution where we are bringing in autonomous research robots that are able to not just do the manual labor of moving samples around, but also do the cognitive labor of thinking about what just happened, what it means, and what to do next. And so I won't go through the details. It's in a paper that I'm happy to refer you to. But what we've done is we've built in our lab a series of autonomous research robots that use autonomy and artificial intelligence. And of course, others, you know, Carla will talk about hers as well, that they are able to plan an experiment, execute the experiment, see what happens, and then incorporate that into the knowledge base, and then iterate over hundreds of iterations to say, knowing what we know, what can we do next to make the most impact in our understanding? And that, of course, can be reasoning-based, knowledge-based, statistical inference, and of course, you can do the similar things with mathematics. And so this, we believe, is revolutionizing the way we do research. We will be able to do research orders of magnitude faster than we can now. And so that's the blue sky version of this chart here, where we expect the speed of research to go up exponentially over the next couple of decades, similar to the Moore's Law. So we're calling it the Moore's Law for the speed of research. The corollary to Moore's Law, of course, is that as chip speed went up, the cost of compute went down exponentially, which made it more accessible, which is why we all have personal phones that are really high-powered computers. And so by making research cheaper, we make it more accessible. And so now people who otherwise don't have access to big labs like we do can do their own research. And so this has been truly motivating for me. And the thing about it is that our thinkers, who we'll hear from today, are the ones who are going to get us from not just using the conventional artificial intelligence and machine learning, but really doing the best possible kinds of machine learning and artificial intelligence and reasoning that we can get to. And so, so that's my excitement about being able to host the seminar and work with our thinkers, and then with the broader community. Okay, so that's it for me. And so Rolf, how are you doing? I'm going to stop sharing and hopefully you're back on. Okay, Rolf, I do not, we might be having a technical difficulty. All righty.
All right, so we flip a coin or go to Vladimir?
I think we go to Vladimir. Vladimir, are you okay to go next?
Yes.
Okay, can you go ahead and share your slides, please?
That's my slide.
That looks great.
I would like to talk about something fundamental in machine learning. So let me talk about two selection problems. So any function estimation task includes two selection problems. First, if we would like to, so first, when we would like to solve some mathematical problem, our goal to select one function from the given set of functions. What it means, we're given training data and we're given set of functions. And our goal is looking on training data to select function which just classify this training data, and possible it is whatever you have in mind. But when we're solving this problem from 50 years or more than 50 years, starting from 50s of 1950s, we solve actually a very simple problem. A given set of admissible functions, I will explain what it means. And we would like to pick up one function from admissible set. But usually an admissible set of functions, it is a small set of functions. It contains not too many functions because every element of training data contains one bit of information. And to select one function from n functions, you need log n bit of information. So that means log n observations. So in the simplest setting of the problem, to select one function from n function, you need log n examples at least. But it is not whatever we have. We have infinite number of functions, and then we select small subset of functions from that. And from this small subset, we selecting functions. That is second selection problem. And all the way, starting from 50s, when we're talking about pattern recognition, about learning, we're actually solving this primitive second selection problem. We're never talking about how we got this admissible set of functions. For example, when we're looking on neural network, from mathematical point of view, neural network is some subset of piecewise linear functions. We're never discussing how we construct neural network. We're doing somehow, and from given architecture of neural network, we would like to pick up some solution, some function. But we don't discussing how to construct neural network, how to construct architecture, and so on. So actually, whatever we're calling learning problem, it is second selection problem, the most primitive, the simplest one. From the given set, small set of functions, we selecting one function. Actually, there is a generalization, so we can consider infinite set of functions with bounded VC dimension. VC dimension, it is a measure of complexity or measure of diversity of the set of functions. But that is mathematical detail. Actually, from the given set of admissible functions, we would like to pick up one function. But more important part of learning problem, and it is what is intellectual problem, which never was considered before, is first selection problem. We have set of Hilbert space with all Hilbert functions. Have to select from the Hilbert space subset of admissible functions. Till now, we never discussing this question. We never discussing this question. That is for the first time, and I call it the first selection problem. How to select set of admissible functions, or how to construct a neural network, or maybe something better than neural network, or if you consider support vector machine reproducing kernel Hilbert space, how to do that. And about 10 years ago, we have solved this problem, they understand. In mathematics, there exists in Hilbert space only two ways for convergence. Strong way of convergence, it is convergence in space of functions, and that what is usually we consider. But also there is another opportunity, convergence in set of functionals, which calls weak mode of convergence. So when I will explain a little bit later what means weak mode of convergence. But when in weak mode of convergence, it is convergence in set of functionals, not in set of functions, but in set of functionals. Actually, if you converge in set of functions, you will converge in set of functionals, and also vice versa, sometimes correct, at least for our set of functions. So given finite number of predicate, to construct set of functions, we can introduce invariants. You see this equation that integral, so suppose we're looking for conditional probability functions. Probability of y equal 1, probability of the first class given feature x. That is function. So our goal is to construct set of admissible set of functions from which we will solve our problem. Later we will solve our problem. So given set of predicate, set of functions, phi of x, we have this equality. So now to construct set of admissible function, we can collect set of function which satisfy this so-called invariant. In very next slide, I will give you example of what means invariant. And then using training data and set of predicate, our goal is to construct admissible set of functions. So when we have a training data and predicate, what we have to construct set of function, we should pick up set of function from Hilbert space, which satisfy this equation. Weak convergence means that equations satisfy for all functions of Hilbert space. So I believe, and that is the problem which never was considered before, because it is not set of first, it is not second selection problem, it is first selection problem. How to construct neural network, how to construct support vector reproducing kernel Hilbert space, and so on. And I believe that that is the most important part of both artificial intelligence and machine learning. What means intelligence? How to select predicate. Predicate reflect our knowledge of problem, our knowledge of life. Actually, when you're doing predicate, you can estimate much, you have much more than one bit of information. One example gives you one bit of information, but you can select as many predicate as you want, and you will have from every predicate much more than one bit of information. Let me explain what means predicate. There is English proverb. If it looks like a dog, or looks like a horse, or like a pig, moves like a dog, like a horse, like a pig, and sound like a dog, like a horse, like a pig, then it probably is a dog, horse, or pig. So actually, we have three predicate: moves, sound, and looks, moves, and sound. That's three predicate. But we can say play a game like a dog. We can say everything, and that will be predicate. And the question is, if you will would like to construct set of functions that function such that they look, move, and sound like a duck, it will be not one function. It will be set infinite set of functions, and that will be will give you set of admissible function. Then you can include the second selection problem, and from this admissible function, pick up one which you really need for your problem. So the problem is how to find this predicate which looks, moves, and sound, because you can choose predicate sleeps, eat, and drink like dog. Why looks, moves, and sound is better than sleeps, eat, and drink? So probably because you know something about reality, and that is your intelligence, which allow you to select admissible set of functions for the problem you're interested in. That's my impression that will be the most important problem for the next maybe 100 years. Because up to now, we never discussed this problem. We never even thinking about that. When you're starting talking about learning problem, you're starting from the moment that you are given set of functions. You're not discussing how you make architecture of your neural network. Given neural network with its architecture, you're talking about learning process for this architecture of neural network. Now problem how to construct architecture which is useful for you. You even cannot formulate what means useful architecture. But if you will consider this line of weak convergence, you have all mathematical instrument and direction which you should address to solve more deep problem. Why it is artificial intelligence? Artificial intelligence, it is not selection, it is not second selection problem. Second selection problem, which is pick up one from the n using log n information, it is Turing type of problem. It is mechanical problem. Just do that. But if you trying to understand what means predicate, why, how to choose concept of look, move, and sound instead of sleep, eat, and drink. It is your knowledge of the life.
Got it.
And
Vladimir, thank you very much. That's a wonderful introduction. And I think let's go to our fellow thinkers and go for a first question. Who would like to jump in first?
I could start, I guess. So, yeah, so could you say a little bit, how does this relate to sort of the problem of the feature selection or feature engineering? Is it related, or is it a totally different?
It is totally different. And from my point of view, feature it is not very good concept. Suppose you increase the number of features. What it means? You increasing set of functions. If you have many features, you can construct a decision rule which include more and more features. So your admissible set of functions becomes bigger and bigger and bigger, and you need more training data. Now, suppose you have more predicates. The more predicate, if it looks, moves, sound, and also sleep, eat and drink, the more predicate you're giving, the smaller training admissible set of functions will be. And less example you will need to solve this problem, to pick up function you really need. It is in some sense opposite concept, feature and predicate. And if increasing of predicate helps you, increasing for features works against you. In selection.
Yeah, so maybe a quick related question. So you said something about the amount of data needed for this first selection problem, and you suggested that may not be so bad, but I like to understand that better. Why? So finding the right set of functions it seems like a harder problem. So what can you say about the amount of data that you would need to do that?
The problem not in data, problem in predicate. So you need data. So formally, you from clean mathematical point of view, you need solution of integral equation. But you're using data to have not integral algebraic equations.
Okay.
But smart part is in predicates.
Okay.
But may I
Say, sorry, one moment. That predicate say you can smile like a duck. It is legal. Duck does not smile. So, but nevertheless, you can say like that. You can say everything. Every predicate is good. But there are some predicates that will help you to decrease admissible set of functions.
Okay.
And this does not come from mechanical, from Turing type of you have examples, and from examples you need. You have something intelligent. Intelligent, it is not mechanical.
Okay.
It is conceptual. Somehow, why I call it intelligent? Predicate, good predicate means that you know life. I don't know how you know that. At least, for example, what I want to construct predicate for solving, say, graphical models. I think the predicate will be different types of symmetry. Horizontal symmetry, vertical symmetry, anti-symmetry, and all this stuff. But how do you recognize graphical images? What means the main element in that? I believe that symmetry. Maybe something else.
So Vlad, we're going to try and get one more question in before we go back to Ralph. So Carla, do you still want to ask your question?
Oh, I mean, my question is, could we state this in terms of how you represent knowledge? to some extent, when because you are emphasizing predicates, in the end, it is how, we represent knowledge and abstract, identifying the most relevant predicates is to some extent how we are going to represent our knowledge. Is that a bit, is it the case that we can equate this predicate in terms of knowledge representation?
So it is everything is different, because predicate means that different type of convergence. It's weak convergence. What means weak convergence? You see on the screen first line, which is integral equation. This integral equation is true for every function phi from x. But if you can choose small amount of functions, if you have infinite number of phi of x, you will have only one function which converges to that. That means that weak convergence take place. But if you have not infinite number of predicates, but finite number of predicates, you can choose so good finite number that you will have small admissible set of functions. And that is knowledge of you, to understand what is that. But it is not mechanical. Intelligence is not mechanical concept. It is you understand something in the life, not because of examples. Examples allow you from integral equation to come to algebraic equation.
Yeah.
Good.
That statement is, I fully agree with that statement. So I want to actually learn more about this, because indeed, we want to find good explanations and understanding. So that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, I would like to finish with one sentence. It is different philosophy, more deep philosophy than learning philosophy. Learning philosophy, very primitive. You have small set of function and you need to pick up one function from the small set. Now we are ready to get how to select this small set of functions. Because if you will use, say, classical mathematical Turing approach, you will say you cannot do it unless you have infinite number of examples. But if you have smart, intelligent predicate, which is much more deep than equations, you can construct admissible set of functions. And that's what should be analyzed, because otherwise you will always in position how to select admissible set of functions.
Wonderful. Okay. Thank you very much, Vlad. Appreciate it. And of course, we could talk for hours and hours on your topic, and we could do that for each of the speakers. But unfortunately,
I would like to say that there is algorithms, there is a code for computer, and it shows that it works.
That's great. Okay. So Ralph, can you bring up your slides, please?
Yes. Can you?
And so Ralph, as he said, is chief scientist and fellow of the Peryton Labs. And so Ralph Ismailov, so we can see you in slide sorting mode. There we go. Okay, great. Please go ahead, Ralph.
Okay. Again, sorry for technical trouble in the beginning. I'll be talking about this as I try to make this a provocative title, making AI decisions more or less confident. So let me explain what I was thinking when I was putting this together. So, and the typical example I've been talking about is essentially binary classification, just to keep things simple. The first point I'm thinking is we need to make decision-making AI decision, machine learning decision, more confident in the sense that typically what's currently been done is if you have a classification, binary classification, the first thing and almost frequently only thing you care about is what is the class of your classification. The probability or confidence level of that decision, that comes as the afterthought. And essentially what is being done is, okay, so you have, that's shown in the bottom, you have your decision metric logits, which are like real number, and you just squeeze them into 0-1 probability. That's okay. That's what you have things like plots, mapping for SVMs, you have softmax curves for neural networks. And again, it's probably okay for if we have a binary classification with balanced data. But as soon as we go outside of that, and we really should, because AI decision is almost never alone. It's not that you want to classify cats from dogs. It's a part of your larger picture where these AI decisions are being fed to something else. And I have listed a few things which are fed somewhere else without a particular order. It's bagging, ensembles, multi-class, active learning. All of these things would require, they do require comparing confidence values of different elements that are coming into the picture. And the only meaningful way of comparing that is if they talk the same language. In other words, if the confidence values provided come from the same space and they are realistic. Maybe just to stress the necessity or importance of that on one example of active learning, we all know about big data and all of that. That's all good. In order to use this big data, we need essentially big labels. We need labels to label those. And that is the current bottleneck where it takes a human expert typically, and which again, depending on the kind of data, which could be time consuming and expensive. And in order to figure out which piece of big data we should label, we should understand how confidently we're already labeling that thing. Should we or should we not bother a human to label that? Again, that would require a accurate estimation of confidences. And the approaches which we currently have are not so good, or sometimes not good at all, of doing that. And to use a typical comparing of AI with a human, well, we should say that humans, not all of them, but humans who make decisions are supposed to sort of intuitively or not intuitively weigh chances of their decisions, and thus make sort of more accurate decisions, if not quantitatively, but qualitatively. So that's an important component, which again, there is research to that, but in order for AI success in the future, those things have to be addressed properly. And the flip side of that, which I think is also very important, and its importance became sort of highlighted in the last, I would say, several years, with emergence of various vulnerabilities and brittleness of AI models, is the fact that AI decisions are frequently overconfident. And what I mean by that is, if you look at the bottom part where we had conceptually like a red cloud of red points, cloud of green points, machine learning would separate them using this curve, splitting its decision into high confidence and low confidence areas, which is fine. But the problem is it unfoundedly extrapolates these decisions into white area of, if you will, unknown unknowns, and it allows decisions which are not founded in the data at all. Again, to use the same cats and dogs example, actually all pictures of cats and dogs are located in the little sliver of feature space, a pixel space. And while we can separate them on that manifold, the extrapolation of that, which any machine learning algorithm does, means that if we give it a fish, it will also classify it as cat or a dog, and without sort of more or less random confidence. So what is needed, and that is being felt in the large area of adversarial machine learning, is ability to again, I'm not giving details of adversarial machine learning, people are probably familiar with that, is an ability to refuse, not just to classify with certain confidences, but the ability to refuse to classify, or saying, look, none of these predetermined boxes actually fits. This particular case is outside of the scope of my knowledge. And again, humans also do it. Well, unfortunately, not all humans, not all the time. But again, if we were to advance it, as Ben just said, to Nobel Prize, a intelligent human should be aware and is aware that not all solutions presented are feasible, and it could be a wise decision to refrain from a decision and instead delegate it or escalate it to some higher body. For example, in case of these machines, to maybe better machine or to a human or something like that, and avoid making a wrong decision. And confidence is not just a property of decisions. The same could be said about models and data. Again, this sort of 3 stages of AI, we can think of that initially it was purely model-based, then later is data-based, and now, again, among multiple performers and research, we see the desire to merge models and data in some fashion. And again, Vladimir's talk was one important manifestation of that, where knowledge about models can penetrate the data and thus make it more relevant. Again, to have an analogy with humans, there is this, well, another Nobel Prize laureate, Kahneman, book of whom some of you may be familiar, Thinking Fast and Slow, who also argues that human mind also consists of 2 systems, slow model, slow system 2, which essentially processes the data, and fast system 1, which is a sort of intuitive evolutionary models which are baked in our mind. And this whole idea of Kahneman's approach to making decisions is essentially what we can currently call adversarial attacks against human reasoning, showing the weak spots of these models. However, again, based on evolutionary construction of our mind, it's actually not fault of human reasoning, because those evolution-based asymmetric and heterogeneous decisions that humans have, they are actually quite valid if we take into account uncertainty in the models. That we can say, this is a model, this is the data, build the best AI we can do to separate one from another. But another part of that is how certain we are with the model, how certain we are in the data. To borrow a popular example in any probability book 101, we have this coin toss example. So you have 50 trials of fair coin. It came up heads. So what would be your prediction for the next trial? We're supposed to say it would be 1/2, but that based on the model that the coin is fair. Who said the coin is fair? That actually gives an idea that the model could be faulty. And again, what humans do, they don't just look at that model, they see what's going on around them. Is it a casino? Is it a mafia-owned casino or something? In other words, to look at the different modalities of data available, different sort of cross-checking with other models and data and modalities. So to summarize, the confidence in model and data, as well as in AI decision, is required towards, can we trust the trained model? And if we can trust it, why? What's the explanation? Does it fit with other models and other data? Can we trust the collected training data and its labels? Because again, those are vulnerable to mislabeling or poisoning attacks and all of that. And again, to call to humans, so ability to be skeptical and reasonable in the decisions we're making, and inclination to doubt the data, the decisions, the models is an important component of the AI models as they grow and become a sort of framework of mutually dependent machine learning, which feed one from another. Again, humans do it, unfortunately, not always. But again, if we're targeting Nobel level humans, as Benji was saying, we need to work towards models which perform as sort of scientific humans who are trained to, again, look at the data under the hood, look at the models, look at the confidences, and taking it all together based on information available from other domain and other modalities, make their decisions. So that's all that I have. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Rolf. That was very enlightening, and I love your idea of skepticism, and especially how it relates to, human robot research teaming. So thinkers, who would like to ask Rolf the first question?
Can I ask a question?
Please, Katerina, go ahead. And then
Yes, I really love hear your. I'm also a huge fan of the Fast and Slow thinking book, and I really also, as you said, maybe the coin is not fair. So not only we say, my confidence is 0.3, we actually find the reason behind. So the question is, how do we build this huge network of concepts and contexts to interpret our decisions, right? To know that for this to happen, it may be, just I'm lucky, it's a fair coin, but very low probability, or it can be, how to say, a faulty coin. So how do we build all these concepts that can allow us to explain away or interpret, let's say, beyond the right? The common sense essentially that humans have and use to check their decisions.
Yeah, I'm sure you're aware there's a growing interest in, I think the catchy word for that is explainability in AI, which actually targets exactly, well, maybe not exactly, but these type of problems that on the one hand, you have these huge neural networks which like miraculously work, so to speak. You give it a data, it gives an answer, but they are notoriously non-explainable. Although again, there is a research on explainability which try to weed out the elements of what particular features or set of input features that you input to the network were essentially affecting the decision. This is a kind of nascent field, which is again rather brittle because as I was sort of alluding here on the whole body of adversarial work, it seems like, again, maybe you're aware of that, it's literally every day there's like another 10 papers published in those kind of areas showing that you can modify a little bit of data, you can modify a little bit of model, you can modify a little bit of labels, and the whole thing just breaks apart. So although it's very powerful, but that's what I was showing here in the previous slide. It's very powerful kind of here where we deal with what we have seen and what the previous collected data telling us. As soon as we move in the little bit of area where we don't have previous experience, then suddenly things break up. So I may be deviating a bit, maybe a lot from the question, but I think this is a very valid direction where we have all kinds of knowledge coming not just from the data we've collected now from this particular coin and this particular casino, but we have all this previous experience in casinos and coins and probability books, and that has to be, generally speaking, again, maybe not for coin toss, but again for Nobel Prize type of work, should be somehow taken into account. Another sort of just thinking aloud at this point, for example, there's a when this whole adversarial learning, machine learning field started, the typical example where people were running around was there's a stop sign, and if you put a little bit of sort of sticker on that stop sign, the trained machine learning network would recognize that as a yield sign, and that was a sort of tremendous success of adversarial machine learning. But again, for a human, that there's another component there. It's not just a stop sign. The stop sign is designed to be octagonal, and yield sign was designed to be a triangular. So humans look at not just like set of pixels, they have another geometrical information which they take into account for a particular reason. That's why this sign was designed in the first place. That if you have a rain and storm and whatever, just by the shape, you can tell stop sign from a yield sign. So again, this is a different modality or different type of knowledge, which again, humans would, well, more often than not, hopefully, use, and machines tend to ignore. Again, sorry for long-winded speech, but I hope I.
Yeah, I think that'll get into Katerina's area, which is the analogical learning and the partnering again that humans can do. Bart, did you have a question?
Yeah, maybe sort of a follow-up question. So we hear a lot about knowledge. We hear a lot about background knowledge, sometimes common sense knowledge, and I think Vladimir also raised this issue of almost something that's not mechanical. So then the question to me is like, where do we think that knowledge is going to come from? Is that going to be, and if we start building these machine learning systems that know something about the uncertainty of their models, where do you see that uncertainty being learned somehow from data, or it has to be coded in somehow?
Well, to answer maybe not answer means I know the answer. To address maybe the first part of your question, it comes actually, I mean, it used to come from natural sources, more or less, that, there's some noise, uncertainty. More recently, I think, again, depending on how we deal with that, it comes from unnatural sources, which is malicious manipulation of data, or fake news and all of that. I guess fake news is a sort of popular term for these things. More formal, it's adversarial, sort of adversarial AI or adversarial machine learning. So, but interestingly, again, the reason I put this slide is what I have been observing so far. A lot of that artificial noise or malicious noise, it comes from here, from this white area of, in other words, the area which no training data or no training manifold was initially available, and malicious attacker has, and there's a bunch of tools right now of malicious attacker disposal to explore that white space and actually find points here, which again, with high confidence would be classified as these or that. So in order to, I think, to answer, or rather to address the second part of your question, how do we might be able to handle that? I think we need to we need to recognize, again, there's knowns and unknowns, and to build or to work towards establishing some kind of fuzzy boundaries between the stuff which we think we know and the stuff which we probably don't know, and behave differently depending on which side of this boundary, not the boundary between red and green, but the boundary between red and green and white should be. So that's kind of, again, not, yeah.
Okay.
I wish I knew the answer.
Well, again, thanks, Rolf. That was super. And so we are going to now move to Katerina. Yep. And so Katerina, if you can share your slides, please. And so again, Katerina Fraikiadaki is a professor at Carnegie Mellon University, and she's going to talk to us about her big question. So Katerina, take it away, please.
Yes, thank you. Can you see my slides in presentation mode?
Yes.
Great, thank you. So I will discuss some questions I think a lot about. They are related to the previous speakers. They mostly concern though embodied AI agents that have cameras, they can see the world, they have end effectors, they can act in the world, they can communicate with humans, potentially in language. So what I think is missing from embodied AI today, and many people think the same. The first is understanding and generalization beyond the training distribution, not just the training data, but beyond the training distribution. Humans are excellent at extrapolation. I'll show examples. And the second I mean, I call it common sense, and you called it knowledge before. Where does this network of concepts and contexts come from that will allow us to contextualize our decisions and double check them and run counterfactuals, predict alternatives, and so on? Where does this knowledge come from? That was the previous question. So just to show, these are pictures from toddler books. This completely out of training distribution for the kids that haven't read the book before. Still, they can parse them, okay, without a problem. So how is this possible? So here we have more mouths, more eyes, and more hands. So not just adults, but very young kids can do such extrapolation beyond the training distribution. So the big open problems that I find very exciting are how can we enable neural networks to essentially compose and manipulate entities, symbol-like entities beyond, feature maps. The second is how can we use fast and slow learning for self-supervision. The third is world models and common sense, this network of concepts and knowledge, and where does this come from? So I think computer vision is an important source of such knowledge. And the last thing that is missing, and I'm not going to discuss, is interaction with human teachers to actually accelerate this and guide this learning of concepts. So now you may ask about why we care about compositionality. Neural nets are already compositional, where there are two types of compositionality. One is the compositionality that we see in neural networks. For example, the composition of functions across the different layers of a network, or the compositionality of features in vector-like distributed representations. But there is another type of compositionality which humans are excellent in and neural networks are not right now, which is entity-centric and compositionality that language suggests. For example, the cat is cleaning, and how everybody and specific toddlers here can recognize entities, the whiskers, the eyes, the broom, the footsteps, and compose their meaning to understand the situation. Okay, and interestingly, these toddlers have never been given any segmentation labels or bounding boxes and so on. They just very few little guidance, very sparse guidance from their parents. So how we're going to get there to this second type of compositionality? One thing we can look is how humans become expert perceivers. They can become experts in understanding faster and more competently what they see. There is the great paper from 1973, Perception in Chess, from Chess and Simon. They say that they show chess positions to master chess players and to novice chess players, and the masters can reproduce the position even if they only sit for 5 seconds, okay? And the novice cannot. Now, why is this the case? Do they have better memory? No, they do not. What they do, why? How did they test that? Well, then they showed them, they essentially constructed other chess positions by, randomly moving the pieces around. Once you do that, the masters cannot reconstruct the position better than the weak players because it's not a familiar board configuration, okay? So what does this mean? This means that the master chess players on their own, without any supervision, self-supervised, were able to compress the visual signal and into chunks that they repeat to become more proficient and faster in their daily perception. And I want to mention that those concepts have nothing to do with language. So they probably put the queen and the horse together to make a concept. Those concepts to facilitate perception and reasoning, they can be at some level supervised by language, but the agent can pursue them on its own to become better on what it cares to do. So this is very, very inspiring from the master chess players. And one way to get there with self-supervision is, again, the same book that was mentioned in the previous talk, fast and slow learning. So we have two systems, and essentially when it comes an out of distribution image, unfortunately, you guys are all excellent perceivers. These are a flawless process for you. You don't even are conscious of it. But when you were learning it, potentially you spend more time on out of distribution images and you thought more. And you came up with some reasonable solution. I mean, to me, this happens when I don't wear my glasses. I do a lot of guesses till I get it. And then when you get it, then you amortize the solution of this thorough search to accelerate your fast predictor, your system one, what we heard earlier. So here is the example of a system that we built that does the same thing. It was trained only on chairs, very different than those type of furniture. And then you let it think and it's searching, and it came up with this solution starting from this very crappy forward and fast prediction. So it had this so to be able to search before just in a feed forward and automatic manner spit out the solution. And the way, and because this also connects to Vlad's and how do we build the architectures and so on. So here we have dramatic out of training distribution generalization. At training time, you've also seen isolated shapes, and then at test time, you see very complicated new furniture, and you're searching through your architecture. How do you search? Because you have these slots in your network that essentially bind features from the feature grid into entities. And then at training time, you train one entity at a time. You're very conscious. You're like, oh, here is an interesting shape. Let me remember it as my previewing distribution. And then at test time, you instantiate multiple of those. So you build a modular architecture, and this modularity allows you to handle scenes that are very out of distribution. And I want to mention that here is our cortex, and it has many, many top-down pathways, while this is the best machine perception model, detect on truth from Facebook, and is all feed forward. We haven't been able to build machines for perception and with very interesting top-down connections that will allow you to tell you this thing not to mess up the traffic sign, the example we heard earlier. If we have those primitives, this is exactly what we try to build in our model, is that, of course, toy, example of what needs to be there, potentially you'll be able to handle such cross occlusions. Where does knowledge come from? I want to argue that these top-down pathways are very, very important because they enable imagination. You can all think now of a frog jumping over a rock to a lake without having any visual stimuli. This type of imagination and this type of saved concepts from perception allow you to do reasoning. For example, I can tell you he used the newspaper to protect his face from the wind, and he used the matchbox to protect his face from the wind, and you understand that the second is impossible. Where does this knowledge come from? Did anybody type it in? Did anybody wrote down propositional first order logic sentences? No, this is all, at least I believe it comes from visual perception, from embodiment, okay? And there is a very nice simulation semantics, this conjecture that we understand language by essentially retrieving those concepts in memory that have perceptual properties and composing them as if we're simulating what the language is describing in terms of constructs from perception and control, from embodiment. Now, the last two slides I have is as follows. There has been fantastic, unimaginable progress in language modeling. We can train now from 40 gigabytes of internet text using 1.5 billion parameters language model to predict the next word. Very, very simple supervision. Just you give them a chunk and ask them to predict word by word. And these models can do completions such as this one. You can give them this prompt and they can imagine very reasonable text following that prompt. Okay, so here it talks, for example, for some scientists that discover some unicorns and so on. And here say the scientist named the population of its unicorn. That's the model's prediction. And the question is, what would be that model for visual perception? Well, here we have a very simple domain. We have a discrete tokens, the words. We have a very regular time step for prediction. You just predict every word. While in videos, we have, for example, we know from human memory that there is a subjective time scale of how we think about things and so on. I do believe that modularity in architecture would be very important. And here's my last slide. We've talked about knowledge and where it comes from. There is an interesting work in language where they sit down and ask humans to annotate a homologous link of concepts. If X repels Y's attack, what is going to happen next? How X is going to feel, how Y would feel, what you need to do before, what you need to do after, and so on. Right? So they annotate those language comes from humans. How can we obtain this network of concepts and contexts from watching around, acting, and interacting with humans? And I think this is the major big question.
Thank you, Katerina. That's very powerful. I appreciate it. So questions from thinkers, please.
So yeah, so if I can start. So yeah, the network of concepts. So you envision some I'm trying to think of what you think of the representation of these networks. Do you think of it as sort of graph-based representations? Are they probabilistic themselves, or what do you have in mind? Yeah.
Yes, exactly what you said. There are graphs because you have different entities, but they keep some perceptual representations. For example, this person can, you remember that a human can hold a mug, and you can imagine holding a newspaper. And when you think about it, you don't just, it's not just textual symbols, but you can answer tons of other questions. For example, can the newspaper be a single page or more pages? Is he standing? Can he use two hands or not? So I would say that concepts might be just abstractions of our perceptual experiences. That could be one way. In a nice abstracted meanings, modularized graphs, and analogical reasoning binding onto them through analogy will allow you to, transfer one concept to another. I would say concepts are all about memory. We all have different concepts because we all have different backgrounds. I mean, we're all humans, so a lot of things are shared, but we do also, differ in some of them, right? Because of our different experiences.
Okay.
Wonderful. So I'm going to throw in a question. So in concepts, I mean, it's a really hard problem, right? How to capture the concept of an apple or a ball or a chair. I wonder, have you thought about it in terms of sort of intended actions with intent to cause something, and sort of the expected return response, the expected reaction? So in terms of like machines, they do something for a reason, they do something with intent, and they expect a certain response. Is there a way of sort of constructing a concept network based on these kinds of actions and expected responses?
Yes. So what you're saying is the apple is not how it looks, it's not its size, it's not its 3D volume, it's what we do with it and what we don't do with it. Absolutely. And I think this is precisely what makes the concept is the entity itself. So the object files we call, right, the different entities and their characteristics, and also the actions that act on those entities and the results, right? And something makes sense when it's linked to all other entities. If it's on its own and has not been linked, it doesn't have it's not useful.
Yeah.
As you
Yeah, and
right?
I worry that, like a response is an expected behavior is something that's within your experience, right? And
right. So this also is there. Right.
Yeah.
So what is the goal? What is the goal? What happened? That's why sometimes when you see an apple, the motor memory of you eating it comes automatically in the brain, right? So all of those I expect to be in this question mark.
Wonderful. Great. Other questions? If there are not burning questions at the moment, we can certainly move on because we are unfortunately very late. But thank you, Katerina. That was wonderful. So Carla, if you want to pull up your slides, please. So Carla Gomez is doing great work and a collaborator. And Carla, are you bringing up your slide? There we go. Great. So she's going to talk to us about her big questions, which are also very linked to what I started out with. So Carla, go ahead, please. You're on mute still.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes. We got you.
Okay. So my next big question in AI is, can AI accelerate scientific discovery and improve decision making for a sustainable future? So this is perhaps a broader question, and to actually try to instantiate this question with more specific computational sustainability questions, let me give you some examples. Can AI accelerate materials discovery for renewable energy, for example, for solar fuels? Another question is, can AI reduce adverse impacts of the Amazon hydropower expansion on people and nature? More than 350 hydropower dams have been proposed for the Amazon. Dams can produce energy, but they can have very adverse impacts, for example, in terms of fish production, sediment production, and they can even increase greenhouse gas emissions because dams can flood the huge areas, forest areas, which leads to the composition of organic matter with the release of methane. So when it comes to planning hydropower expansion, we need to think about these multiple effects and trade-offs and think in terms of like multi-objective Pareto optimization. Another question is, can, for example, AI combat the rapid decline in biodiversity, for example, with planning of wildlife reserves? Well, you know, from a computation point of view, and this is the beauty of computer science and AI, there are many synergies across these different questions. And in fact, for example, models that we develop for understanding interactions and of species interactions and joint species distributions, those models we actually used for predicting multi-properties of materials, and a key part is interpretability. So, you know, in these short remarks, I will focus on high throughput materials discovery, also known as combinatorial materials discovery. So there are many computational challenges in scientific discovery and decision-making for the current state of the art of the AI. Some of them already mentioned by the previous thinkers. For example, we want to understand and explain the phenomena beyond just mere prediction. We actually want to understand causation beyond correlation. And in general, we are dealing with tasks for which we only have very small or incomplete data sets. And in fact, typically the most pervasive setting is really unsupervised or semi-supervised learning. Also, as I try to point out, we have to make, our systems have to make choices, multiple choices, often combinatorial choices, and again, it is important to consider a variety of objectives aligned with human values. So, you know, this leads to a huge, what we call the curse of dimensionality, large space that we need to search, and with the number of parameters and a variety of combinatorial choices. There has been tremendous progress in AI. The focus has been data-driven AI, as mentioned before, you know, by other speakers. And recently, especially because of deep learning, reaching superhuman levels on several tasks. And while pure data-driven AI may be suitable for tasks for which we have large amounts of training data, it's not really suitable for scientific discovery and decision-making systems. So, you know, I believe we need really to combine data-driven AI with knowledge reasoning. And, you know, because we need to, our systems need to be able to reason from first principles, factoring prior knowledge, reason about uncertainty, as discussed before, and we really need to, the systems need to be able to reason symbolic and having combinatorial reason to deal with this large search space. It's also important to, in order to increase autonomy and human feedback, you know, obviously we need robotics and human-computer interaction. Let me give you an example of a framework combining deep learning with reasoning for discovery, deep reasoning networks. Can you make sense of these symbols? Well, we see some letters, some numbers, but it's not really obvious what's going on here. But now if I give you additional information, namely this actually comes from two overlapping Sudokus, one on digits from 1 to 9, the other one on letters. And I tell you the Sudoku rules that you cannot repeat a symbol in a row, column, or block. Now, it's still very difficult for us to make sense of this symbols, and we don't have training data. We are assuming we actually don't have training data. Well, deep reasoning nets are able to unsupervised, in an unsupervised setting, demix these two overlapping rules, and doing this by combining deep learning with reasoning about prior knowledge, the Sudoku rules, via an interpretable latent space. So, you know, the supervision really comes from the reasoning about Sudoku rules, and again, without mixed Sudoku training data. More importantly, deep reasoning nets can solve crystal structure phase mapping. That is a core long-standing problem in material science. And the goal is, given X-ray diffraction patterns, you want to infer the crystal structures of the system and demix them. And here we have an example of 307 unlabeled X-ray diffraction patterns of this bismuth-coupled vanadium oxide system. This system was beyond human expert capabilities. Humans could not really solve this. It was previously unsolved. We do have some prior knowledge that, you know, scientists use them, so our systems should also use the prior knowledge. For example, there are known phases for other systems involving bismuth, copper, vanadium, and we call these stick patterns because they are ideal noise-free patterns of known crystal structures. And we know these systems obey some rules, like they are thermodynamic rules, but think like Sudoku rules. So with this information, actually, deep reasoning nets, by combining deep learning with reasoning about the known phases and the thermodynamic rules, so supervision from this prior knowledge, without training data, the framework was able to demix, to identify these 13 crystal structure phases, and actually, basically this identified 19 phase regions, and you see some of, there was no knowledge a priori how many phases would characterize each field. But, and in fact, interestingly, this system, we never see a pure structure in isolation. So some phases have are a mixture of 3 to some phase fields are a mixture of 3 phases or 2 phases, etc. And in fact, you know, subsequent work by some photo activity experiments and measurements by my colleague John Gregoire identified this 3-phase mixture as a promising solar fuel material. So, you know, in the future, I imagine that AI robotic scientists for materials discovery will be like SARA. SARA stands for Scientific Autonomous Reason Agent. And the idea, the vision is that SARA will encapsulate the scientific method, including formulation of hypotheses, planning, execution, and interpretation of experiments with production of new knowledge. And here what you have is a rendition of SARA controlling a laser spike annealing. And basically the idea is that SARA selects the next experiment in terms of temperature and dwell time, and it will use information from optical data for drawing this phase boundary map for this bismuth oxide system. And you see here the phase boundary map produced by SARA. So, you know, to conclude, I believe that AI robotic systems for scientific discovery really need to seamlessly integrate knowledge reasoning and data-driven AI, allowing for natural human-computer interactions. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Carla. That was fantastic. So do we have a question first from a thinker?
Hi. Yeah, so I really love your results. I'm reading your paper. It seems that you have this nice rendering generative models. And yes, so what do you, I don't know if this is your main theme or not, but I do believe very much of this rendering as a reconstruction feedback for disentanglement and so on. So to allow to see things under occlusion, same way humans do.
Okay. You are talking about this?
The ones you showed with the digits. Yeah.
Yes.
Mm.
And-
Yeah, so this is very, very nice.
And your question is, sorry, the connection is flaky. I may have missed.
So I checked your paper and your architecture has this nice, as you show there, decoder. So you don't just look at something and you try to reconstruct it based on your prior knowledge, right? So I think this is very powerful way of going ahead with perception, that you need to have a system of what you've seen before and try to project what you see into that, let's say, manifold, right?
Yes, yeah, that's a very, your question is excellent. And in fact, here, and we did use the Sudoku because, crystal structure phase mapping is too complicated, but indeed we use, this decoder, basically bringing knowledge of what digits look like, correct? And in fact, that is key. In fact, this idea was really, we used a decoder for the phase mapping. We replace this instead of, the digits, what digits look like. The decoder for the phase mapping is a model of what crystal structures look like and the known crystal structures. And you raise a very good point. In fact, we've done ablation studies where if we remove this decoder, then the interpretable latent space cannot find the right semantics because it's too weak. The system is not conditioned enough to actually find the right interpretation for the semantics for our latent space, where we need to basically, the latent space is collecting information about the probabilities of the digits, of the probabilities of the crystal structures, and the shape of the digits in the shape of the crystal structures. So very good question. Thank you.
Thanks, Katerina. Other questions?
As we let Bart get his slides up, I want to let the folks know we'll take questions from everybody after Bart's talk, and we probably will run a little bit over like we did last time at the end of the day.
So if you can stay, please stay. But we do have a lot of great questions.
Stop sharing?
Yeah, stop sharing. Yeah.
Okay. So thank you, Carla. That was wonderful. I of course appreciate that you're working on material science. Yes, okay, thanks. And Bart,
Okay.
Thelma, of course, is also at Cornell. Please go ahead, Bart.
Okay, great. So I'll try to keep this. Well, I've timed it at 9 minutes, so we'll see. So knowledge-centric AI, and it's maybe a little. Whoops. Let me just. A little different than the previous talks that focused mainly on machine learning. I actually have something that I call, artificial non-human intelligence. So we standardly think of AI as mimicking human intelligence or outperforming human cognition in areas of perception, learning, reasoning. And of course, deep learning is changing all of what we thought was feasible, at least when we have enough data. However, there's a separate development, and it's a little less known, but I think that there's been significant progress over the last several decades. I call it non-human AI, reasoning, planning particularly, and it's part of the world of software verification, program synthesis, but also mathematical discovery and part of scientific discovery. The development really proceeds without an attempt to mimic human intelligence. It's more like to augment human intelligence with different capabilities. What I'll do is, I just want to give you, two little highlights of some of the results that I think are most dramatic in my mind. So I start with a little result from mathematics. I'm mainly focusing on mathematical discovery. The Erdos discrepancy conjecture. A conjecture was open for over 60 years. And it basically asked a question about sequences of +1s and -1s, or plus and minuses. And the question was, can these sequences be highly balanced? Can you construct a sequence that's highly balanced in terms of number of +1s and -1s, as well as all its subsequences? And Erdos basically said, no, you cannot create very long. At some point, you cannot balance the full sequence and subsequences. Let me define it a little bit more precisely. So we're starting with an original sequence, and I just had put down some random sequence of -1s and +1s up here. And then we consider, so we don't just consider the original sequence, we also consider subsequences. So these are called arithmetic progressions, but this sequence is a subsequence, and we skip by 1. So that's element number 2, element 4, element 6, 8, etc. Here we skip by 2, and here we skip by 3. So we look at the sequence and all its subsequences, and now we have all the sequence and the subsequences, and we want them to be balanced in terms of +1s and -1s. And the way we look at it is we look at the partial sums when we step through these sequences. So here we have, just for the original sequences, if we move from left to right and we keep computing the summation, you see it go 0, 1, up and down a little bit. And we're going to look at this number, basically. And we do the same thing for the subsequences, okay? And now what you see in this little example is you never go above 2. So this sequence up to here at least is balanced, and its subsequences with never deviating by the number of +1s and -1s, never goes above 2. So what's remarkable is that for a long time we did not know how long a sequence we could construct. In fact, it was open whether we could construct an infinite sequence that would have all its subsequences and its original sequence balanced. So in around 2014 or 2015, it was found that you can construct a sequence of 1160 plus and -1s, such that this imbalance of all these subsequences and these partial sums never exceeds the value of 2. So it's purely balanced. So it's a very highly balanced sequence. Now, the main result was really the next one. So it was found by Konev and Lisitsa in 2015. There is no such balanced sequence of 1161 elements. Now, 1161 is 2 to the 1161 possible sequences, so that's over 10 to the 300 sequences. And basically the result shows that each of these sequences and all its subsequences, for each of these, there is at least one subsequence that is imbalanced. So it has an imbalance of 3 or higher. You cannot have a fully balanced one. So this was a 60-year-old conjecture. It proved, you can prove it actually nowadays in about 10 hours with a stat solver on a MacBook Air, and I give it in my class as a homework. But the key thing is it was done with a general reasoning engine, so not a program designed to solve this particular case. There have been results in mathematics where you use code to prove particular theorems. This is done with a general reasoning engine. So, and it has actually, the proof has over 1 billion small inference steps. The machine understands and can verify. I say understands, but what I mean is the machine can verify the results in milliseconds. So you can actually write a 50-line or less than 50-line proof checker that everybody can write easily themselves. And in a few milliseconds, it will check those 1 billion steps and say, yes, this is a true result. For the human mind, probably can never quite understand this proof, or you probably never understand this proof, but we can be 100% certain of the result. So what does this mean for mathematics? Well, it means that human future mathematics will be augmented with results that are machine discovered and are mathematical truths, and we can then build on these truths. So I think that's a very exciting future path for mathematical discovery. So I now want to give you one more small example is, can we find proofs in more expressive formulas? And propositional logic is quite restricted, of course. It's the dream of the 1960s, really, to have general mathematical discovery by machines. And basically proofs are like intricate plans. So every step needs to fit exactly with the previous step on the path to the goal. And the goal can be thousands or millions or billions step away. So so you have to find very intricate plans. Now, we are not there by a long shot. I think it's still a very hard problem to do general theorem proving, but we have some promising progress. And the interesting thing to me is it's a combination of deep learning. It's learning to find these plans with a knowledge-driven combinatorial reasoning. You combine these systems together and you can construct very long, very intricate plans. I just want to give you a little example of this deep, we call it deep SOCO plan. So SOCOBAN is actually a little planning puzzle. You have boxes here. This is, think of warehouse, and these are corridors, and these are walls. There's a little pusher, a little man that has to push these boxes around to get to this location. Now, looking at this picture, it looks sort of innocent. It looks like this could be solved easily. It's actually the first, for about the first 100 pushes you have to make are very critical. Any deviation, any wrong push will get you into a deadlock situation. So the planner actually had to find a very subtle sequence of moves. And I'm just going to show you, I think it should be going, yeah, there he's going. So the little pusher is going to go, but he's doing it in a very particular way, and the deep learning curriculum trained learning framework with combinatorial reasoning could find his way after I think about 10 hours of training. So it should go, and don't worry, it actually will go a little faster. I tell him to hurry up at some point. Let's see. Okay, let me see. Give him a little bit of chance, but there they'll go. Okay. Now I say, come on. One sec. Okay, there we go. Okay, so he's done. Okay, so so very subtle sequence of plan. Now this looks maybe not too intricate. So let's go. Okay, what about this one? So all the boxes have to go to the yellow spots, and the runner is right there. I'm just gonna start it, but I just want you to enjoy. This is the shortest known solution for this particular problem. But you see, it almost has a bit of an algorithmic structure. So he starts working in certain areas, and then, and I'm going to speed him up we're going to go much quicker soon. So you see him cleaning up and doing it in a particular order. Now, the deep learning system discovered it, combined with the reasoning system. It had to be a combination of the both. But really what I think you see here is sort of the start of, we're starting to find algorithmic solutions. We're starting to find new kinds of algorithms with these methods. Now, this is a 1,000+ step. For true mathematical discovery, I think we need to go to millions of steps and billions of steps, so we're still far off, but it's promising. So now, finally, so deep learning and reasoning, I see it as the first phase. It has been perception, vision, speech, dealing with noisy analog world, very data-driven approach. I'm quite interested in, and it's been very exciting, but I'm very interested in this next phase, which is more symbolic, dealing with the more formal, the discrete world. But that's, of course, the language of science and engineering. So the language of science and engineering is logic and mathematics. Now, and I like to say, we think of, quantum physics and probability is key. But of course, the laws of science, the laws of physics, and the laws of engineering and mathematics are not probabilistic. They are actually logical. So we need to integrate this combinatorial reasoning with learning and data-driven methods, and there we're going to see a lot of progress. Just to emphasize here, the difference with knowledge is, the Peano's axiom encode, these are a few lines of axioms that encode all the properties, including unknown properties like twin prime conjecture about all the natural numbers. These few lines, so just to get to these new results may take billions of steps. And I actually think, to connect with the previous speakers, when you think of discovering new predicates and new useful knowledge of looking at the world, well, one way you have is very natural in mathematics is a new concept is useful when it leads to a much shorter proof. So there's actually a notion of good concepts, a concept that simplify our models. Okay, final slide. So we're looking at there's a complexity hierarchy. There's a computation complexity hierarchy. The easy problem, polynomial time here, exponential time up there, undecidable even harder. And it's almost a game where the humans are clearly excelling at this lower level. And I see the machines can start giving us results at these higher levels, the harder computational problems. And then the machines are going to give us these new insights. And the question is, what are we going to do as humans with them? But I think as humans, we will be using them to enhance our knowledge of science and engineering and accelerate those fields. Okay, thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Bart. And so let's go straight to a first question from the thinkers. I see Vlad unmuted. Vlad, do you have a question?
How about Carla? She has an inside track that the audience doesn't know.
Go ahead, Carla.
Yeah.
So I guess, Bart, you talk about non-human reasoning, and is it non-human reasoning just because it's overwhelmingly complex, or is it just that, or is it fundamentally in terms that human cannot conceive?
Well, so that's a good question. The individual reasoning steps are understandable. So one nice thing about formal reasoning is that the individual steps are easy. If you put 1 billion steps together, you can get results that to me a machine can see. It's almost like a machine looking at a chess position or a machine looking at a theorem. The machine can see in terms of 1 billion steps fairly easily. The humans, my sense is we can understand complex mathematical results if we have the right auxiliary concepts, the right intermediate concepts. If you don't, so as this Erdos discrepancy result for discrepancy of 2, we don't know what these right intermediate concepts are. The machine can get by without seeing those. So I do think it's sort of a kind of thinking that is beyond what we can do. But hopefully, we will find intermediate concepts that are useful to understand these proofs.
Right. So is there a concept that in these billions of steps that are machine generated, there's some underlying algorithm or strategy, that sort of allows you to condense those steps into something, and maybe that's something that humans could understand.
Yeah, and I think that's a very interesting direction, is to have the machines try to develop shorter proofs, basically, or higher level hierarchical proofs that are human understandable. It's
might
not
have to do an analysis of your billion steps there, which would be fun.
yeah. Which are the critical steps? Yes.
Okay. Well, so that's the end of this section, which is our thinkers presenting, and then our thinkers questioning our other thinkers. So let me take a pause here just to thank each of our thinkers for the wonderful presentations and questions and further questions, as I know that some people will have to drop off at 4. But let me just go to what will be our next section, which where Scott Klaus will start to bring up questions from the participant audience, with the caveat that Doug is going to, as the sort of lead thinker, will give us our first question. So Doug, go ahead, please.
Hey. And again, I want to thank everyone today. It was wonderful. Scott, I noticed your microphone is turned off. There's been a few people who have banged on my door, shall we say, so I queued them up already. The first person is Jan LeCun. The second person is Tom Mitchell. So if we could let them go first, let them turn on their mics and ask your questions. I'll pass them over to you, Scott, because you know Jan personally and Tom.
That sounds good to me, Doug. I don't know that I have the ability to promote folks. I can try.
Kathy Ragsdale is listening. She'll open the microphone for people. Jan LeCun's the first one. Y-A-N-N. Jan. Kathy?
Okay, I guess I'm unmuted.
There you go. Hey, Jan.
Hey, doesn't look like I can turn on my camera, so you'll have to just see my name. And I'm not sure why, frankly. It should have worked. But anyway, yeah. So I guess there's a lot of themes that have been discussed here, or for the last thing, from sort of general question about what machine learning can do to can machine acquire some level of common sense that we've heard. The latter is a problem that I'm really interested in at the moment, which I talked about a few weeks ago in another edition of this. And I really kind of am puzzled by the type of the type of paradigm of learning that we're observing in humans and animals that we currently don't seem to be able to reproduce in machines. So, in machines, we have supervised learning, we have reinforcement learning, we're starting to have self-supervised learning. And one big question for me is, can self-supervised learning in some form lead us to the type of learning that we're observing in humans and animals, particularly the type of learning that allows humans and animals to learn models of the world that allow them to look ahead, to plan, to understand how the world works, understand the mechanics of their own body as well, and do this in a very efficient way. It seems to be much more efficient than what we can do with artificial systems today. So what is the paradigm of learning that we need there? That's the question I keep asking myself and everyone I meet.
Thanks, Jan. Super question. Bart, do you want to start?
Yeah, no, I think it's a super relevant question, and to me that question is partly, machine learning. We think we can get all this from data, and I'm wondering a bit about that. So I was at a talk where people looked at the cognitive science behind perception, and we talked about the notion of object. So what makes an object? And what came in the discussion is sort of like, is the notion of an object, is that something that we learn when we're born, what an object is, or is that actually sort of pre-wired in our evolutionary architecture? And if it's pre-wired, then you can say, well, we could relearn that, but then you're asking to in some sense replay evolution, and if you replay evolution, it's not clear that you're going to get to the human brain or you're going to get to a virus. You can't just replay evolution. So there is a bit of this question: is this all? And I think it's a fundamental thing for machine learning is, can you get everything from the data? And in work that we do, for example, is Sokoban planning, but even when we study learning games with deep RL. If you start saying, can I learn the rules of the game by just seeing examples? I claim you cannot. It just doesn't scale. You can learn some of the rules, but you cannot learn the rules of chess by just, I know there's a result by DeepMind, but it's not quite what it is, what they made it out to be. If you try to learn the rules of a game by just giving examples of gameplay, it's extremely hard. So there is a bit of a question, I think, for machine learning folks is, are we going to stick with the paradigm of I'm going to learn everything from data, or do we have to do something else like pre-coding knowledge, pre-coding certain regularities of the world?
So I actually have some ideas about this, as you might imagine.
Mhm.
So, I mean, I think in principle, everything can be learned from data, but the question is how fast. And so there are things
and how much data?
Yeah, exactly. How much data, right? So, obviously the amount of, if we extrapolate from what we appear to be able to do with machines today, you would conclude that you cannot learn everything because all of the paradigms that we have are, ridiculously inefficient in learning anything. But the type of learning that we observe, again, in animals and humans, now we can ask the question, what is hardwired and what isn't? Probably not much is hardwired, actually, at least not in humans, beyond sort of basic kind of, life-preserving reflexes and stuff. I'm not an advocate of the blank slate, but I'm an advocate of the fact that human behavior, human nature, or the nature of other animal is specified by intrinsic objectives more than by explicitly hardwired functions. And so we have an intrinsic objective, for example, to feed when we're hungry, but nature doesn't tell us how. Okay, it's just an objective, right? It's just that, we feel uncomfortable if we're hungry. So, we feel like we need to fix it and find a way to do that. But there's no innate way of doing that, of foraging or whatever it is that you want to do. So I think a lot of our behavior and the nature of animals and humans is determined by intrinsic objectives. And then it's up to the learning system to figure out, like, how do you satisfy those objectives?
May I make?
I just want to jump in very quick. So yeah, so this innate, I guess I don't mean with innate built-in, specific piece of knowledge, but I think, for example, I think of language. I could see that we have something in the brain that allows us to do compositional structures that are the compositional semantics that form the basis of language. There's something in our brain somewhere, an architecture that evolved at some point that allows us to do sort of symbol-like processing. That is probably not it might not be, other animals might miss that. So I'm talking about that kind of learned in structure. And yeah, in principle, you could relearn that, but then you have to replay evolution. So I agree that probably not much detailed knowledge built in, but certain preferences for certain kinds of capabilities may be built in.
Carla, do you want to go?
Yeah, I was just going to make a comment. I mean, it also depends on domain. In terms of, for example, scientific discovery, it's clear that, we build knowledge on prior knowledge, on, the knowledge of the shoulder of giants. And for us to try to get a system to learn Newton's laws, we would need, an obscene amount of data. So I do think that this idea of finding, representations and indeed the issue of where knowledge comes in, but at some point we do use prior knowledge. And for example, I in my remarks, I showed how, with prior knowledge, you can in an unsupervised way solve systems beyond human capabilities, but relying on prior knowledge. And that's how scientists work. I mean, no scientist would try to reinvent from scratch scientific knowledge. So finding the right balance, I think that is important. But I do believe that for us to make how do we build ontologies to acquire this knowledge? That is a major challenge. But I'm a believer that to navigate, and in fact, as you mentioned, self-supervision is important. And in the example that I showed, where, for example, for your domain, MNIST, there you are now. I can see you. Without using self-supervision of knowing this is a Sudoku. And now I can reason about, the Sudoku rules. And it is quite amazing because, that actually increases digit accuracy. It outperforms even, we compared with the supervised learning CapsuleNet or ResNet. And, if with supervised versus an unsupervised system where you don't have training data for the mixed digits, but you do have the knowledge that about the Sudoku rules. With that self-supervision, you can actually increase, digit accuracy dramatically. And of course, this was key in the materials for inferring crystal structures from X-ray diffraction patterns, where we have no label data whatsoever. We just have knowledge about, and this is really how scientists work. They know what crystal structure exists, they know that, and they reason about these thermodynamic rules that say, for example, if you have a system with 3 elements, you cannot have more than explain the phase with more than 3 phases, etc. And with self-supervision, with prior knowledge, you can actually reach superhuman capabilities. And but indeed, I think the big question is, how do we find the trade-off? How do we model these prior knowledge? And in fact, if we know, sometimes if we try to encode too much knowledge, it becomes counterproductive. In particular, in language, that's an issue too.
If I can add very briefly, so I think Carly raised one important point, which I found in mathematical discovery sort of key. It's cumulative. So you build on previous concept. You start with elementary school, high school, middle school, high school. It's a monotonic increase of knowledge, and that seems to be very important for scientific and engineering knowledge. And you build on the previous knowledge, and to start going back to the data to learn the concept is very hard. So a learning system has to be able to build on what it has discovered before. And that's, I think, I feel sort of missing in current machine learning.
Yeah. So I think that's what oh, sorry, Vlad, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I think that we came to philosophy. The main question, can we learn just from data? My answer is that it is not. In the most old philosophy of Plato, it started that there exists world of ideas, which is separate from the world of things. And now we came to the same story, because we're talking about prior knowledge. What it means? It means world of ideas, which is prior to whatever we see on examples. So when I try from mathematical point of view to look what we can do in the learning, there is a brute force learning, or learning from examples. And one example, it is 1 bit of information, but we don't need, we need much more than 1 bit of information to pick up one smart function. So that means we should have some prior knowledge. How to claim idea of symmetry? There are no symmetry, like it is abstract ideas, which like in Plato, in the world of ideas, and we're projecting this in the world of things. So when we're trying to do both, world of things and world of ideas, from my point of view, whatever I talk predicates, it is world of ideas. They should meet somehow, and then only if they will do together world of ideas and world of examples, then you will have enough information to do learning. So I think that we in the very good position now. We came back to the very old philosophy of Plato, which starts that we projecting some ideas in reality, and that's help us to understand what's going on.
So let me just make one more comment, and then we'll go back to Scott for Tom's question. When Jan, you talked about humans and how humans learn versus machines, and I think of students, sort of the teaching. I think we're focused more on teaching and less on learning. So teaching being sort of downloading lots of information to students, as opposed to experiential learning, where students learn by doing. And I think, that's how toddlers learn about gravity and laws of physics is dropping things and falling down and so forth. And so I just wonder if philosophically, again, if there's another approach there that could help us out. But Scott, could you go ahead with Tom, or Tom, if you can just go ahead and unmute yourself, go ahead, please.
Got it. First, I have to say thanks. This is a fascinating set of ideas. And I have to say, Jan's question changed my question. My question comes from two observations. One, if you want to know the future of machine learning, you should look at how humans learn and computers don't yet. And we learn from data, but we also learn from watching YouTube videos. That's how I learned how to repair the dryer door on my laundry. We learn from reading books. By the way, people don't learn the rules of chess from data. They are told the rules of chess. We learn from instruction. So that's one observation. People learn from all kinds of ways, and we get to learn a lot in 100 years that we couldn't really get that far if we did it from data alone. Second observation is about this discussion, where one of the big themes I hear is a shift toward a more integrated style of AI. We want to combine reasoning with data. We want to get new representations and so forth. So those are the two observations. My question is kind of a proposal. Why don't we just automatically assume for every AI program and research project that we build that there's another input available to the AI system, which is the web? So for example, if we go back to Vladimir's point about we need to shift toward discovering the function space, not just selecting which function to use, then I would propose the following PhD thesis topic, which I think is a great topic for 2022. Instead of specifying a machine learning problem by the inputs and outputs of the function you want to estimate, specify it by saying what the output is. For example, I want to learn a function that will predict which stock prices will double in the next year. Notice I didn't tell you what the inputs were. That's my problem. I want a PhD thesis written on that problem where the other input is the web. And if you're good enough at processing the web, as we people are, you'd be able to figure out what some of the inputs, input predicates should be. And if you combine that with data that's available on the web, then you have a pretty interesting framing of machine learning problem that pushes us and makes it look very different from today's problems where you say, here are the inputs you can use and here's the thing you have to predict. Similarly, when I hear Carla talking about use of AI for science and Bart talking about the kind of reasoning we want to do with that, I can't help avoiding thinking that there are all these papers on the web written by scientists that give a lot of that background knowledge that you're talking about using. And when Benji talks about the same thing. So I'll kind of close it here, but it's, I guess, to turn this into a question. If you think about using the web automatically as another input to any AI system that you're trying to build, does that shift your problem in interesting directions? And is it a good idea research strategy wise?
So maybe I have a little bit of something to say about this. I mean, I think there is a tradition in, let's call it classical AI, of sort of going for the type of intelligence that only humans and only humans in the last few hundred years, you know, have been exhibiting, if you want, like, you know, like playing chess, like, you know, coming up with rules of physics and things like that, Newtonian mechanics. But like most of learning that takes place in the world, certainly in the animal world, but even in most humans, is not that type of learning where you read a book or you're told something, or you can, you know, think deeply about, you know, causal relationships and mathematical relations. It's more, you know, experiential learning. So babies, you know, learn about gravity around the age of 9 months, and most of it is not interactive. Most of it is just observational. A lot of what babies learn in the first few months of life is just observational, just by watching the world go by, you know, with a bit of active vision, because you can move your eyes, right? They, you know, they understand a lot about the world. They understand that, you know, the world is three-dimensional, that some objects are in front of others, which means they understand the notion of object. If they understand object and occlusion, then they can understand that when an object is behind another one, it still exists. It's still there, the notion of object permanence, which is learned in the first couple months of life. It's actually very hard to figure out exactly when that happens. And then you can learn about, you know, the stability of object. Is an object going to stay stable if you put, you know, you set it on the table or not? They understand very early also the difference between inanimate and animate objects. The inanimate ones are the ones whose trajectory is easy to predict. And so all of this learning is basically just by observation. So the type of learning that takes place there in animal and humans is the one that we cannot reproduce. And you know, that relates to something Bart was talking about, the fact that, you know, we build new concepts and more abstract concepts on top of previous ones. So the process I just described, which is sort of very much sort of a Piaget kind of view of you know, cognitive development in children, is that you learn simple concepts and then you learn abstract concepts on top of it. And once you have all those concepts, you have a good representation of the world. You understand when you are, you know, 17 or 16 that, you know, when you turn the wheel to the right in the car is going to go to the right. And if the car is next to a cliff, the car is going to run off the cliff. And if the car runs off the cliff, you're going to get killed. And so you don't even try it. You don't have to, because you have this entire model of, you know, intuitive physics that you've acquired. So as a result, you know, a teenager can learn to drive a car in about, you know, 15 hours of training, whereas, you know, our best RL system would require millions of hours to not even get close to the reliability of humans. So that's what we're missing. You know, how do we learn models of the world? That's the one question that, you know, I'm basically obsessed with right now.
Let me inject a thought. It plays off of what you said, Jan. It goes all right up against the grain with things that Tom and I have talked about over the years with architecture. It goes through all 5 talks today. Sorry, all 5 thinking moments today that I heard from everybody. And I got a lot of email from the last time we did this in October for bringing back some old stuff. There was a Turing lecture given in the late 1950s, I think. And in it, and you can guess who was the speaker. Marvin said the following, it's one of his really good quotes. You can't learn anything well until you have learned it many, many, many different ways. And I was hearing that constantly as a theme through the talks this afternoon, and also the comments from Tom and Jan. It's about integrating. Even Jan's comment about a baby that's only observing for the first few months. Well, what's it doing? There are probably at least 20 different machines, different modal machines about, you know, space, time, etc., that are already capturing what it observes. And so, no, it's not one machine that does it all. It's many different types of reasoning that are already coming in from the baby in those first few months, because it's reasoning about space, time, causality, functionality, etc. No, you can't get away from the Minsky quote. We need to take it seriously. And that's why I love the work that Carla and Bart have done, because they try to figure out a way to use different types of modality. That's why I liked Tom's paper from centuries ago when he was back at Rutgers. And he found that in order to reason about a coffee cup, you had to reason about its functional purpose, its compositional structural purpose. I'll stop there, but I wish everybody would go back and read Marvin's Turing lecture, because he nailed it. He said, we have to have many different ways to learn to learn. And we keep going forward like we've invented a new idea. No, it's there. You know, same with Simon and Null. It's not that I'm stuck in the past, because I really love the future. And if I want to do something cool, I'll go have a beer with my good friend Scott Klaus, because he's really way out into the future with what he's doing with machine learning. I'm going to stop there, but I kind of throw that out there because it's integration of many, many different types of learning all together. It's an architecture problem, just as Tom Mitchell has talked about it in many, many of his papers.
Wonderful. Thanks, Doug. So Scott, I turn it back over to you to bring up the next question, please.
Well, I thought we might give other folks, if they were interested, a chance to respond to Tom. I know we got a couple of perspectives there, but we've got a lot of folks in the room.
That sounds great.
Yeah, so I think Tom's idea was always super ambitious and great. And indeed, I think in the end, what we are advocating for is this idea of really, finding a way of extracting knowledge, for example. So the web could be for sure a great source. And I mean, I do think this is a very ambitious project, but in principle, indeed, you could imagine, and I think this probably has been done in the science fiction movie, where there's this computer reading everything, the entire web and maybe other sources, and, converting it into knowledge. And then, and of course, this is a big challenge for AI, is really how to convert, and indeed, I have to say, for example, even in very specific domains, this is actually happening, exactly what you are suggesting, Tom. For example, even in material science, where now you want to, go and learn all that's known for a given system, for example. So where you are going to use natural language and, ontologies and knowledge graphs to try to actually absorb all the knowledge, which is super disseminated and actually scattered. So I think that idea is excellent. Perhaps, and the way we end up making progress is somehow restricting the domain. I mean, if we keep this super open, it's very difficult to make progress. But I personally am, maybe because I'm interested in problems for which the standard machine learning doesn't work, like scientific discovery, and so that has been my attraction to. But I think the idea is great, and indeed, if we restrict, go to a very specific narrow domain, this is the kind of things that we should do. We should really find ways of, extracting knowledge from all the literature, all, web pages, etc. And I think that it is a great idea. Very challenging still, obviously.
Let me add something. Jan talk about algorithmic and technical part of the learning, but there exists conceptual part. All of us talking about function selection, but when you start to analyze on the level of very high level function selection, you immediately can come that you cannot learn just from data. You need concept of prior knowledge. You need concept like in prototype of prior ideas. And that should be pay attention more, because up to now, we did not consider in learning problems this spot.
If I can, Vladimir, if I can follow up quickly, you mentioned something that you thought that selecting the set of function was not a mechanical process. Like, are you posing that it's not a
I'm talking about predicate.
predicate, that is not a computational?
Yeah, it is properties.
Yeah.
So, and this predicate and properties, you have prior, your knowledge, prior idea. For example, symmetry, how you can understand principle of symmetry, the idea of symmetry. There are no symmetry in the nature. You cannot learn symmetry from book. It is sort of prior knowledge which exists in you, and you're projecting it in reality and sees symmetry.
Yeah.
And that is part of philosophy of Plato and Hegel and all these guys who from.
I think it's interesting. I mean, when you mention something like symmetry, it's actually, because I'm interested in sort of mathematical proof discovery. That's sort of a general concept.
It is very simple. No, but what is symmetry?
Yeah.
So you have two-dimensional pictures. Can you explain mathematically what means symmetry? I tried to do that. I tried to formalize this concept of symmetry, vertical, horizontal, diagonal, all this stuff, anti-symmetry. It can be done, but you have this inside of you.
Okay.
May I just make another comment, still thinking about a comment Tom made that I really actually thought it was quite interesting. We are, also talking about this prior knowledge, and he actually pointed out, which is that we learn from instruction, correct? And indeed, to some extent, maybe that's what we are also saying somehow, by instruction, learning, our systems will learn about prior knowledge, which there are many ways of doing this instruction. So he emphasized instruction, and I thought that was actually an interesting point, because we do learn from instruction, and it takes, it takes. So I'm still learning several years, correct?
Prior knowledge means that it is prior. It is exist in you before you start your knowledge of the world.
Yeah.
That means prior knowledge.
Yeah.
I just want to point out quickly one thing. If you've looked at Harari's book, Sapiens, which if you haven't, you should. It's a great book. One of his main points is that individual humans have not really gotten very much smarter over the last 20,000 years. Evolution doesn't work fast enough for that to happen. His point is that the reason we have all these magnificent things around us today, like computers, that we didn't have 20,000 years, is not because we're smarter individuals. It's because we figured out better ways to organize societies. And the number of ideas we can share and people we can share with them is orders of magnitude greater now than it was 20,000 years ago. So if you take that as a starting point, his book is really great. You should read the book if you haven't. What does that suggest for AI? I think it's the same thing. We don't want, AI has been focused on building individuals that work alone. And maybe we're making the problem wildly more difficult than it needs to be by not allowing those individual AIs to interact with the rest of society, and the web is one way to do that.
Oh. And I mean, to some, I guess when Bart talks about non-human intelligence, in the end, I think he's really talking about, you know, a bit what you are saying is that we surround ourselves, including with machines that indeed can, you know, perform at a level that is beyond our level, you know, which we are very familiar with. For example, if I give a big number, a human can multiply to big numbers, a machine has no problem. But now we want to, you know, extend these capabilities, you know, like I'm sure, you know, there's superhuman face recognition. I'm sure that is something that already exists based on all the web, all the data out there. So, but I like your point. That is, you know, almost complementing and bringing together, you know, networks of computers, people, etc., to extend our capabilities.
And maybe just to jump in, that sort of, you know, as Tom was saying, it's a great point that humans learn by being in a society, and of course, society, that aspect is our social aspect, right? That's one of the things that humans are so good at, and the dynamic of a social interaction is this back and forth communication. So we have to be able to represent knowledge, represent information, communicate, but also like emit things, right? Say something with that expected response, and then take the response and sort of fit it back into your, you know, the way you conceive of the world, or how you feel about things.
I would like to hear from some of our future of science people who are a few years younger than many of us. Katerina, Scott Klaus. Scott, you've had some amazing ideas that you're doing with machine learning. And Katerina, since I first met you, I was totally floored with your thinking. So you two are sitting too quiet. Either one of you, please pipe up and say something.
Sure. So here is the thing. There are two different types of learning. So one is what Jan discussed, what happens in the first years of life, that you learn to see and move around, something that we're all proficient about. It's something that evolution has worked on for many years. And there is the other type of learning, the superhuman learning, right? That we want to use in science and to do math proofs, and that these are very hard for humans. So, and this is doing well. So I'm more focused on the first part. I feel like a lot of common sense and knowledge will be built on from our perception, right? So what we see, what we hear, what we touch, and this will help on transferring those knowledge to later tasks. For example, for driving, you will not worry if a trash bag falls on top of your car, because you know that, you know, it's not you're not going to hit the brake, for example, right? This is common sense that you didn't learn while you were driving. It's common sense that comes from earlier age. Now, how do we do that? I think that was another important question, how we can make machines that learn like animals or in humans. I mean, if Bruno was here, would be even jumping spider is better, has a better perception system than current deep neural networks. And since I mentioned Bruno Olshausen, I also had this question all the time, how much is wired and how much is learned? So according to Bruno, who is a neuroscientist, he says a lot of part is the ready structure on the brain. There's a lot of structure, and then there are some parameters you fine tune and so on. But he said that this is important. Now, this doesn't mean that we cannot do it. Of course, we can eventually also do it. The question is, what are the architectures and supervision that needs to be there? I think modularity is very important, and entity-centric, like symbol-like representations inside the network. So I don't think it's going to be useful for perception action to say, okay, here is the noisy world that you're just going to featureize, and here are the symbols that live outside. I think perception is still a very difficult problem. It's just we don't realize. Like, you can parse all of those entities. No machine learning system will be able to parse them. There still needs to be a search over symbols, where the symbols are just in a different way. There are just some vectors potentially represented to explain the percepts, and not only to see static percepts, but also on the move, how the different percepts are related. This is the world model, right? the dynamics and how the different parts are connected in space and time. I think now, of course, the important question is, can the secondary superhuman learning happen without the first part of learning? Potentially in many domains, yes, like scientific discovery. You don't need to know a lot about the world or about embodiment to do well. Now, learning to drive, potentially no. We all think that, you know, the lack of common sense will essentially hit a barrier and will not, you know, maybe we'll not be able to have cars operate autonomously and effectively, you know, in difficult out of distribution situations, where we need to do exactly what our previous speaker said, to draw information from multiple different contexts. So I'm wondering if we cut completely the embodiment part, the perception and action, whether we can, you know, continue later. Yeah. Now, about how we're going to do it, one book that I like is The 6 Lessons from Babies from Elizabeth Spelke, a psychologist. So there, learning a language is the 6th lesson. It is there, it's the 6th one. There are some other ones about interaction and so on. And of course, the devil is on the details, right? On the architectures and the modularity and how we get them to generalize beyond the training data and so on. So this is what I would like to say.
Okay, thank you. Scott, you're not off the hook.
Well, I just want to agree with the points you made there about you know, learning from multiple sources. It's a piece that we really focus on a lot in the Act 3 group here, is how to take a lot of different information from different sources and combine them. And it's certainly a non-trivial task, right? I guess the piece that we like to focus on is the balance across these different learning mechanisms. And so we could talk about, well, there's some of these superhuman capabilities that can be learned by you know, maybe allocating a few more resources to creating these relations between concepts and pulling information in from the outside world, and making sure there's a high fidelity between the information you're pulling in from the outside world and your internal simulation where you're operating. But maybe in the way that people operate, you know, learning to drive, as to follow up on your example there, it could be that you don't need to know all the blades of grass in the nice garden area beside the street as you're driving down the road to be able to operate the vehicle. And so this key I think that we're focused on is that balance. Can you shift some of that computational power away from maybe the observational components, or through compression, right? To do that compositional construction that we talked about earlier of concepts, and really wrap concepts together so that you don't have to have that kind of a computational power focus on the observation, and instead put more emphasis on the predictive or expectation component of your internal simulation that can help you say, oh, well, I need to interact with the world in this way or the other. Put more emphasis then on some of the predictive components. And so that we have these to put some vocabulary to it. We talk about the simulation, and then how the concepts being how situated are they, how closely related are they just sparse concepts that we have kind of point representations in some space, or do we have that good connectivity between them? And then what is that requirement between, you know, that representation, that connectivity, and the outside world? Do we have to have that real high fidelity kind of relationship or not? And so it's the balance across those three different modes that we like to think about. We like to think about tackling this problem of using information from a lot of different external sources, a lot of different sources, and whether that's, you know, through closing the loop and interacting with the world, or just straight observation.
Wonderful. So I'm reading on the chat that we have a hard stop at 4:30 in a couple of minutes here. And so I'd like to get us to a graceful exit rather than just have everything closed down all at once. So let me, before I turn it back over to Doug to close, let me thank first each of the thinkers. So Carla, Vlad, Katerina, Bart, and Rolf, I don't think I missed anybody, as well as, of course, Scott for handling things, and our wonderful audience. I think the audience interaction has been just amazing. So thank you very much. And Doug, I turn it over to you to close the seminar.
Oh boy, I have 1 minute. I just want to say thank you to everyone. I hope we had a fun afternoon on thinking together, and stay tuned because we will have many more of these events. The next 2 are already being planned. One delves heavily into math and the other delves heavily into one-shot learning. So I saw Jan look up. Yes. So we will have lots of fun in the future. Thank you. And we'll keep you posted, and we'll get copies of anything you want sent out to you. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Good night.
Most important, I want to thank Benji. He did a great, great job.